June 9, 1953, 5:25 p.m. Near Hinton, West Virginia, a Chesapeake and Ohio Mallet-type locomotive disintegrated in seconds after a catastrophic boiler failure, instantly killing its crew. How did the most powerful steam locomotive ever built, capable of producing over 170,000 pounds of tractive effort and operating at pressures reaching 300 pounds per square inch, also become one of the most inherently dangerous machines ever placed under human control, and why did experienced crews continue operating it despite knowing the risks? Stay with me, because the answer reaches far deeper than a single explosion. Coal was the backbone of the Chesapeake and Ohio's business. In the early 1950s, the railroad moved nearly 30 million tons of bituminous coal each year across the Appalachian Main Line. The route from Pocahontas to Morgantown, West Virginia, forced trains to climb and descend grades as steep as 2 to 3%, more than 100 feet of elevation for every mile of track. On these slopes, a fully loaded freight could weigh over 2,200 tons, demanding a locomotive that could deliver more than 170,000 pounds of tractive effort just to keep moving. Railroad timetables and freight tables from the era show that a single coal train might stretch for 55 cars, each one packed to the limits. These trains weren't just long, they were heavy, and the grades were relentless. The Mallet-type articulated engine was introduced as a direct response to these brutal conditions. By dividing the locomotive's massive weight across 2 engine frames, the design kept axle loads within track limits while still delivering the brute force needed to haul coal up the steepest hills. But this power came at a cost. To meet the demand, engineers pushed boiler pressures to 300 pounds per square inch, far beyond what earlier locomotives could safely handle. Every run up the grade was a test of metal, steam, and nerve, and the numbers behind the operation reveal a system stretched to its limits. The mallet wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity born from the unyielding demands of coal country. Anatole Mallet, a French engineer working in the late 19th century, set out to solve a problem that haunted the world's railroads: how to move more weight over steeper grades without breaking the rails or the engines themselves. His answer was both elegant and radical. The Mallet locomotive combined 2 key ideas: compound steam expansion and articulation, into a single machine. Steam from the boiler first enters a pair of high-pressure cylinders at the rear. After doing its initial work, that same steam is routed forward into larger, low-pressure cylinders mounted on a separate, pivoting engine frame. This 2-stage expansion squeezes more energy from every pound of coal, while the articulated front engine lets the locomotive bend around tight mountain curves that would defeat a rigid frame of similar size. The physics are simple on paper, but brutal in practice. High-pressure steam, often at 300 pounds per square inch, demands thick boiler plates and flawless seals. The rear engine, fixed to the boiler, takes the initial blast, while the front engine, riding on a hinge, absorbs the exhausted steam. By splitting the drive between 2 sets of wheels, the mallet spreads its enormous weight, sometimes 600,000 pounds, across more axles, keeping the pressure on each wheel within the limits of the track. This is why a mallet could haul 2,200 tons up a 2% grade without tearing up the rails beneath it. But this design comes with trade-offs. The flexible joint, the complex piping, and the constant vibration all create new points of stress. And while the compound cycle delivers unmatched pulling power, it also means more moving parts, more potential for leaks, and more ways for a single failure to cascade through the entire system. Mallet's invention was never just about brute force. It was an engineering gamble, one that would be tested every day on the steep grades and sharp curves of coal country. The drive for more power on the Chesapeake and Ohio did not stop with the mallet's basic design. Each year, as coal traffic increased and trains grew longer, railroad engineers responded by scaling up the very core of the locomotive, the boiler and firebox. The firebox area, once considered enormous at 80 square feet, expanded to 125 square feet or more, demanding a constant roaring fire just to maintain steam. Boiler pressures that started at 210 pounds per square inch in earlier decades were pushed to 300 pounds per square inch by the early 1950s, a level that placed every joint, seam, and stay-bolt under relentless strain. Maintenance records from the period reveal a troubling trend. As the engines grew, so did the frequency of minor leaks and stress cracks. Annual shop reports from 1951 to 1953 show a steady rise in boiler patchwork, emergency retubing, and stay-bolt replacements. Pressure logs from C&O's Mountain Division document long stretches where boilers ran at or near their maximum rated pressure, sometimes for hours at a time, especially on the steepest grades. Every new increment of power required thicker steel plates and more complex bracing, but these improvements could not fully counteract the rising internal forces. The sheer size of the firebox, over 9 feet deep and nearly 9 feet wide, meant that even a small lapse in water coverage could expose a vast area of overheated metal. Under these conditions, the margin for error narrowed to a razor's edge. The mallet's unmatched strength became inseparable from its vulnerability, as the relentless escalation of scale brought the limits of both materials and maintenance into sharp focus. Inside every steam locomotive boiler lies a hidden frontier, one where metal, water, and heat are locked in a constant, uneasy balance. The heart of this system is the crown sheet, a thick steel plate forming the roof of the firebox, separating the roaring coal fire below from the high-pressure water and steam above. The crown sheet's only defense is the water that bathes its upper surface. As long as this water remains in place, the sheet stays cool enough to withstand the intense heat. But if the water level drops even by a few inches, the exposed metal can overheat in minutes, reaching temperatures far beyond its safe limit. The Interstate Commerce Commission's report on the Hinton explosion describes what happens next with clinical precision. When the crown sheet is no longer submerged, its temperature spikes rapidly. At around 800 degrees Fahrenheit, the steel loses strength, warping and bulging under the relentless pressure. The moment water returns, whether from a sudden surge in the injector or a slosh in the boiler, the superheated metal flashes that water instantly into steam. The result is a violent, uncontrolled expansion. In the case of Locomotive 1642, the entire crown sheet failed at once, releasing a wall of steam and pressure that tore the boiler apart in less than a second. This sequence, low water, overheating, instant steam release, is not just a theoretical hazard. It is a well-documented failure mode, described in Interstate Commerce Commission dockets and railroad safety manuals time and again. The technical language may sound detached, but the underlying reality is anything but. The margin between normal operation and disaster was measured not in feet, but in inches of water. Every gauge, every alarm, every maintenance check was a last line of defense against a physics problem that gave no second chances. Maintenance logs from the early 1950s reveal a troubling routine. Signature boxes were left blank after boiler inspections. Calibration records for the Nathan Type B low water alarm were missing for months at a time, and critical repairs were delayed to keep engines rolling through peak coal season. On paper, Chesapeake and Ohio's procedures called for regular checks and dual sign-offs, one by the fireman and one by the engineer, before every run. In reality, the demands of the schedule often forced shortcuts. The logbook for Locomotive 1642, for example, shows a boiler tube inspection completed just 3 weeks before the Hinton explosion, but the record for the last firebox check lacks a mechanic's signature. No one could say for certain if the water level alarm had been properly tested. The Nathan Type B alarm, standard on these engines, was supposed to be a fail-safe. Yet, accident reports and Interstate Commerce Commission dockets from the period list repeated incidents where the alarm was either miscalibrated or ignored. In the months before Hinton, at least 2 engineers filed complaints about unreliable readings, complaints that were noted but not followed up with documented repairs. When the wrongful death lawsuit reached court, Chesapeake and Ohio's defense rested on the argument that every crew accepted the risks. The case was dismissed under the doctrine of assumption of risk, leaving the families with nothing but the official findings and the knowledge that the system had tolerated the danger for years. After the disaster, Chesapeake and Ohio issued General Order 4553, requiring double verification of water level alarms and quarterly calibration checks. The order came too late for the crew of Locomotive 1642, but it stands as evidence that the railroad understood the risks long before the final, fatal failure. The pressure to keep coal moving had outweighed the pressure to adapt, and the cost was measured in lives as much as in tons. Inside the cab of a Chesapeake and Ohio Mallet, the world narrowed to heat, motion, and constant vigilance. The engineer, John Edward Miller, had spent nearly half his life on these rails. At 41, he was known for his steady hand and unflinching focus, a man who understood the weight of every decision made behind the throttle. His partner, fireman Robert Lee Hughes, was 38, a veteran in his own right, respected for his speed at water stops and his knack for reading the boiler's moods. Payroll sheets from June 9, 1953, place both men on duty that day, their names logged in the Division B roster, 2 among hundreds who kept the coal moving through the mountains. The cab was no sanctuary. Temperatures regularly climbed above 120 degrees, the metal floor vibrating with every piston stroke, the air filled with the smell of hot oil and coal smoke, punctuated by the constant hiss of steam and the rattle of the firebox door. Every sense was pressed into service. The engineer's eyes flicked between the pressure gauge and the rails ahead, while the fireman managed a rhythm of shoveling, watching the water glass, adjusting the injector, and listening for the faintest change in the boiler's voice. Witness depositions describe the relentless noise, the physical exhaustion, and the knowledge that a moment's inattention could tip the balance from routine to disaster. Yet both men returned to the cab day after day, bound by a mix of duty, pride, and the unspoken understanding that the system demanded everything they could give. Their lives and their deaths were shaped not just by the machinery they operated, but by the invisible pressures that came with it. The story of Locomotive 1642 is, in the end, the story of the people inside the cab, carrying the weight of progress on their shoulders. Today, we still build systems where the drive for maximum output can normalize hidden risks. The Mallet's legacy isn't just power, it is a warning about how quickly safety margins erode under pressure. The most dangerous machines are often the ones we convince ourselves are under control. Stay curious.